Peace, family. Welcome to African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. Before we get started with today's video, if you are watching on my YouTube channel, I would ask that you do like, comment, and subscribe, and also hit the notification button. But most importantly, please also subscribe to my Telegram channel. Telegram is a way to communicate that is decentralized and uncontrolled. So please add yourself to there so that you get updates if I'm doing a live stream or posting a video. In addition, please add yourself to my channel on Odyssey. Odyssey is basically the same thing as YouTube, but it is decentralized. All links to these different platforms are in the description. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of a part 2 to a previous video that I did. If you do not recall, the new WTO head that was recently appointed is an African woman from Nigeria. Her name is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And a lot of people were celebrating whenever she was put inside of this position to head the WTO. The reason was because she was the first African woman ever to have that position. Well, it seems that a lot of the dreams might not have been realized that she had, or that she said that she had, as far as work that she maybe wanted to do. And so I think that this brings up a very important conversation that we need to have in our community about when we aspire to do good things for our people. And I'm assuming maybe that's what she wanted, to do good things for her people. When we aspire to do good things, but we are going to aspire to do it inside of institutions that are inherently, I would say, evil even. If you think about the WTO and what it does to people who are indigenous, it's just evil. You know, there's no way that you should be able to rob people who have already faced so many challenges as a result of colonialism and imperialism, rob them of the right to make economic decisions for their own betterment, so that you can benefit only a few people that are primarily inside of the West. But this is exactly what the WTO has done historically and what it continues to do today. So we're going to have a conversation today. We're going to have a conversation about the issue, the mentality that has been fed to us, that we can be actors inside of imperialist systems, actors inside of colonialist systems, actors that are going to do something good. And it's important for us to understand, as I think maybe Colin Powell understood whenever he was nearing the end of his life, that these rewards that were given for being the first Black this or the first Black that, or the first African this or the first African that, these rewards that were given are really not are really surface level, because at the end of the day, you still have to be held accountable to your community, and then whenever you die, you have to be held accountable to your creator. Did you do the right thing when you were in that position, or was that position basically made to manipulate your people, to give the perception that an institution that was against the people was not exactly what it was, as far as intrinsically being made to oppress the people at large? So that's going to be the discussion today. But first, let's go to some African news that's happening around the world. Always on this channel, we stand in solidarity with Haiti, the people of Haiti, the people who dared to be free when the imperialists said, no, you will never be free. But we believe that Haiti will be free, no matter what anyone has said or has done to it. So Haiti right now is possibly facing some more setbacks because of what has been reported. And I think that this opens up the door for something like an intervention. Now, I'm going to go into more depth about this story this weekend on the We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. That is Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. But I do want to just give a brief overview that essentially what they're saying is that a gang kidnapped a group of 17 Americans and Canadian missionaries in Haiti. And they're reporting that this gang has asked for $1 million each for their release, which would be $17 million. Of course, they have to emphasize in this article, it's 16 Americans and 1 Canadian, because whenever it's Haitians or anyone that's not American or anyone that's not European that's kidnapped, that doesn't get the same news. But they emphasize this and say that this gang essentially wants this money. Now, we're going to talk this weekend on the podcast about the insidious nature of missionary work that is being done and has been done to African people. But for now, be aware that this is what is being reported, and also be aware that this can have implications, as far as what the West decides to do. If they decide to, stage some type of intervention and say that they're going to do it for this group of people, but the real reason is because they want an excuse to once again occupy the Haitian island, that is very much a probability. So as always, be vigilant and always keep Haiti in your prayers. Kind of a plot twist has happened. The only African woman president, and I want to emphasize that because some of you were celebrating whenever this African woman president became the president. Well, she is making some moves that are definitely not good for Africa and not good for Tanzania. So, of course, President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who is the president of Tanzania that took the place of President John Magufuli whenever he passed away. Well, she has decided to hire Tony Blair, the same Tony Blair that used to be the Prime Minister of England, a British imperialist giant, and also the one who has done very much shady things, not only to Africans, but indigenous people, period. He was very close to the United States, obviously. Well, this same person, who is an enemy of African people, has been hired by this African president who supposedly wants to do good for the people. It says government officials say Tony Blair's Institute for Global Change has been hired by President Samia to handle two of her administration's key projects: the fight against COVID-19 and rebuilding Tanzania's international reputation. In July, Blair paid his first country courtesy visit to Tanzania, where he and President Samia discussed how to combat COVID-19 pandemic. Blair said his institute is responsible for facilitating the testing and distribution of vaccines and may help Tanzania to access top vaccine producers. Now, some very big things to highlight about this story. One, when have you ever heard a sovereign government hiring an outside organization to come in and do something that the sovereign government should be poised to be able to do? Like, you would never hear of the UK bringing in a Russian company to lead an initiative that is an essential government function. If you consider COVID-19 a health emergency, which I'm sure we all do, that's an essential government function. So it's essentially appointing an outside organization to head something that the government should be doing. That's very concerning, but it also shows us how closely the current president, President Hassan, is aligning herself with Western interests. Because when you're making these moves, it's because you see the outside organization that is obviously sponsored by outside countries as being one with your government. And this is something that I think would be very much opposed by President John Magufuli had he still been alive. So this always brings back the question, and of course in today's topic it's going to come up again, of why we feel the need to celebrate the first this, the first that, the first African doing this, the first woman doing this. Why we need to celebrate these things offhand without actually having substantive proof that this first person will actually do good for the people with that position. We should have higher standards as African people and stop looking for the first and start looking for the real, start looking for the authentic, and start looking for the people who are actually controlled by us, beholden by us, and who are going to represent us properly. Last but not least, Colin Powell has died. Colin Powell, who was the first black Secretary of State. This is a first black episode, I guess, today. But yes, so he was the first black Secretary of State. He was Chief of Staff serving under George H.W. Bush. He served as the National Security Advisor for President Ronald Reagan, the Secretary of State for George Bush's first term. He presided over U.S. foreign policy in the aftermath of 9/11 terrorist attacks and later the invasion of Iraq. This is someone very much inside of the big house being the slave house. If we understand that these foreign policy positions that this man has taken has had devastating effects on our liberation movements. Just to throw in one, also keep in mind that whenever Colin Powell was Secretary of State, Maurice Bishop was assassinated and his government was overthrown in Grenada. This is something, not the Secretary of State, when he was National Security Advisor under Ronald Reagan. This is something I do not doubt that he had something to do with. So these are the issues that happen with African people. There's no way you can't be compromised whenever you're working for your enemy and you're actually doing your job well. If you're not compromised, meaning if you're not sold out to your same enemy that you're working for, that means you're not doing your job right. And he did his job right. We know that because he was not only hired by Reagan, he was also hired by Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. So if you want to hear a little more, you could check out the Black Power Media episode that aired on I believe the 19th, that was featured on Black Power Media morning show, and you could check out some more commentary on that. But as of today, this person has passed away. Some people were sad. I think most people who have a heart for people who are the global majority, the global South, are either indifferent or are celebrating. Okay, so let's get into the subject at hand today. What is happening over at the WTO? Well, Okonjo-Iweala Frustrated may quit World Trade Organization job. That's what officials are saying. The Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, may consider quitting her job at the organization if no headway can be found on critical issues, trade officials at the organization have suggested. Now, the officials who pleaded anonymity have stated that barely 7 months into her 4.5-year term, that she has grasped the frustrating reality of the WTO's historical inertia and was even floating the idea of resigning. According to them, she had repeatedly told ambassadors and staff that she could easily walk away from the job and reminded them that she had not bought any furniture for her temporary home inside of Geneva. Now, it's been speculated that Okonjo-Iweala wants to run for the president of Nigeria inside of 2023, and that's the reason why she may resign. However, she has denied this, and she has also denied the reports that have come out that she wants to quit. But again, this is being reported from officials inside. And just for a little more context as far as what specific policies may be motivating her to have even said something like this to the officials, it was reported that a near-term test of Joe Biden's trade strategy is not just to work with partners, but to forge common positions on urgent issues impacting the trade system. Meaning, in other words, that Joe Biden doesn't want to have the World Trade Organization just work together collaboratively for the good of everyone, because I'm sure all of you know there's no such thing as the good of everyone as far as these people. There's only the good of a very small percent. Well, he doesn't want to do that. Instead, he wants to push for people who are similarly aligned, European countries basically, and push that those countries, along with the United States, are able to assert their dominance inside of the WTO. It says most urgently reform of the WTO, especially in its dispute settlement mechanism, but also on subsidies and SOEs, which shape rules and help the U.S. gain leverage with China. Inertia on reform reached the point where the WTO's new chief, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, recently threatened to quit. So, according to reports, the United States has been taking unilateral actions that would compromise the integrity, if the WTO has integrity, but would compromise the integrity of this institution. And that might have made her voice why she wants to quit. Now, before we even get into the nitty-gritty, it's important for us to understand that this was destined to fail. Whether or not she quits or whether or not she stays inside of this position to finish up her term, this position was destined to fail, because the way that she was marketed to everyone was that this is someone that was going to shake this thing up. And that's something that I said before. Whenever you're inside of a white supremacist institution, people who shake things up don't work. Meaning they either get rid of those people or those people stop shaking things up. But this is how she was marketed to the public. This is how they put out the story. If you recall, Joe Biden, so it's important to also emphasize that the United States controls the WTO, like all the other institutions, but so to the point that Joe Biden actually had to sign off on approving her to that position. This is supposed to be an international body that is not biased. This is supposed to be an international body that is not controlled by one country. But if one country has the say on whether or not you're going to have the position of leading this institution, obviously it's not an institution that's representative. It's one that's controlled. So that's one thing that has to be emphasized. But also, like I said, she was marketed as being this trailblazer, and we're going to actually talk about why it was that she was selected for this position, despite the fact that she was marketed as such. It says, as Nigeria's first female finance minister under President Obasanjo and Goodluck Jonathan, Okonjo-Iweala oversaw sweeping financial reforms, listen, that helped stabilize the country's volatile economy. Pause right there. When they say stabilize the volatile economy of a country, Nigeria is not stabilized because Nigeria is not stabilized for most of the people. Nigeria is only stabilized for a small segment of the population and for foreign investors. And that's something that has to be emphasized. When you say stabilized, what are you saying? Are you saying that the poor, that the hood, that wherever our people are going to be inside of a better situation? Well, if you're not saying that, then what you're saying is very specifically tied to neocolonialism. It says, indeed, her leadership was crucial in ensuring $18 billion in debt forgiveness and helping Nigeria secure its first ever sovereign debt rating. She also pioneered a program that culled ghost workers from civil service payroll, saving about 163 billion naira over 2 years. Now, Okonjo-Iweala started the privatization of state sectors, okay? That's important to emphasize. She started the privatization of state sectors like power, though the process has since been proven to exacerbate problems, resulting in spotty power supply and price increases for the country of over 200 million people. Privatization, people. If you're gonna, if you are for privatization, and many of you know I'm mostly not, but if you're for privatization of industries, you should be very careful to emphasize that privatization never works well whenever you're talking about public amenities. And whenever you're having a corporation and not your government that's actually the one that's controlling the power of a country, that's very significant. And the fact that she pushed for that is very telling. Now, additionally, though Okonjo-Iweala tackled corruption by making states report their accounts, failed attempts to diversify the country's economy, a stated aim of Okonjo-Iweala and the Jonathan government, has left Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, vulnerable to the shocks of global oil markets. Now, this is what she did, and that kind of gives you a little idea of why she might have been picked, because it wasn't controversial. It wasn't shifting the power holders. It wasn't enfranchising the disenfranchised. She was, basing in Nigeria, playing the game. And as well as doing that, she was also, doing things in favor of the West. Privatization, they always want privatization in the West because it allows them to come to your country and buy up a lot of things that local people who have been deprived historically don't have the money to buy up. So this is why I say privatization is not something I'm for. Now, central to her economic outlook is the belief that political and economic fruition of Nigeria and other African countries is contingent on better integration of women into all areas of political and economic life. Though many Nigerian women have become influential entrepreneurs, she notes that lack of educational opportunities for women and girls in the country's north have impeded development and growth, a crisis exacerbated by a deteriorating security situation in northern Nigeria over this past decade. Now, that right there should tell you again why she was picked, because the representation politics. Okay, yes, I hope all of us are on the same page that women and men are equal. Women and men, occupying positions and having diversity and your sex and all that. Like those things are important, right? But what's also important is to know that diversity does not necessarily equalize anything. Because the fact is, putting more women inside of these positions of having an education, putting more women inside of these positions of having quote unquote opportunities, does that shift the economic landscape that existed already for the men? So meaning if the men that are inside of that society are very much disenfranchised, and the women were only more disenfranchised, you're basically equalizing the disenfranchisement between a woman and a man, and you're going to go outside and pitch that as if you did something revolutionary and groundbreaking. But it wasn't groundbreaking because the class system remains intact. All because it's not just the husband that's being exploited, but now the husband and the wife are being exploited. That's not something to be applauded. The education system, was it working for the men that you integrated the woman into? And if it wasn't working for the men, did you deal with the problem as to why it wasn't equalizing the economy for the men before you tried to market this as you're pushing something forward for women? So that's why we have to be very careful and actually get specifics from people. Whenever they say, oh, well, we're going to push for more women in the workforce, that is great. Absolutely. Now, while you're doing that, please explain to me what workforce are you pushing women into? Are you pushing women into a workforce that's going to exploit them further? That can't be forward. If you're pushing women into positions that are going to do nothing to actually help them to be able to care for their families any more than their husbands did, is that really helpful? That's why we have to get to specifics. Don't allow these imperialist institutions to set the agenda for you, because they'll tell you that merely providing economic opportunities is enough. No, you need to set the agenda for yourself. What type of economic opportunities? What is going to exist for the people collectively? Are you actually putting us in a better economic position? Are you giving us control over our destinies? These are the questions that should be asked. Now, they did say, however, that she paid a personal price for her reforms, a crackdown on corruption of the oil industry, where they said her mother was kidnapped by bandits demanding the finance minister's resignation in cash. She refused to resign, and her mother was eventually released safely. I'm glad that she was released. Now, this is why I hope you understand why she was picked. She's non-confrontational to the global capitalist system, and non-confrontation to capitalism is something that capitalism can deal with, obviously. Now, ideally, you're not just non-confrontational. Ideally, you're like a golden child. Ideally, we'll talk a little bit more about Colin Powell in a little bit, but ideally, you're a Colin Powell that exists, that's excited about these market economics where you have these people who are exploiting the masses. They're excited about that. But if you're not going to be excited about that, then a caveat would be someone that's non-confrontational to it, someone that's not going to speak directly about it, and someone who will offer surface level policies that are non-threatening to the system. And this is what imperialism does consistently. Now, the problem for Okonjo-Iweala is that she does have very surface level policies, but even those surface level policies are not being honored as far as the World Forum, where there is a very clear colonist versus colonized line. There's a very, very clear power grab. I mean, there's a very clear order of things that is literally set up in a certain way. And so even some things that might be, poppable to, mainstream society is not necessarily going to float well with the colonists. So let's talk a little bit about what she has been pushing politics, as well as during her 25 years at the World Bank and now at the WTO. Okonjo-Iweala has always emphasized African nations as well as other emerging markets, and I hate that word, like emerging markets. That literally makes an indigenous country for sale. Like, okay, well, this is somewhere we're going to go and buy up. No, these are countries that are composed of people who do not necessarily conform to your market economics. So we have to challenge these terms, but this is what they use. They said other emerging markets are some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And again, framing Africa as the fastest growing economy in the world without actually talking about the most developed population, meaning the most taken care of population, the most healthy population, the most educated population. These are the terms that they get us to use in order to distract us from the real conditions of the people. Now, pointing to the fact that many frontier economies in Africa and Asia were engines of the world's economic revival in the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2009, Okonjo-Iweala says that African nations should be given more of a voice in global forums where important international decisions are made. Now, is that such a horrible thing? I mean, that's to me something that even, the most backward colonists can at least on paper agree to. Africans in America, some might say that we have more of a voice now than we used to have, but has that voice actually changed the economic conditions of African people? The answer is no, especially whenever you look at the disparities between white society and African society inside of the United States. Because you see in housing ownership, you see in business ownership, you see inside of income, you see in all of these different categories, mass incarceration, obviously. all of these categories were still powerless. All of these categories were still unable to push for our demands. And hey, maybe you have more of a voice, so maybe you're being heard, but you being heard is not being implemented into actual change for your people. And so that's not confrontational to the system. And yet the system has failed to even meet her there. So obviously, we talked about the issue of the vaccine nationalism, but it's something worth emphasizing one more time that Okonjo-Iweala, she was trying to basically boost vaccine access around the world. And something that has been a consistent issue that has been up inside of the conversation has been vaccine nationalism, meaning the idea that a certain country, the Western countries predominantly, are pushing to ensure that their vaccines are the vaccines that everyone has. So essentially, you're all going to buy our vaccines from us. And they were very resistant whenever there was a push to basically allow for the distribution of those same vaccines by other Africans. So there's a lot of issues whenever it comes to even side of the global medical system, because it's really medical apartheid, and that has manifested a number of times. And so what we've seen here was that she was trying to push for more access, or more equal access, and no favoritism. But instead, the Western countries wanted to ensure that their vaccines had the upper hand. Another thing that Okonjo-Iweala has been frustrated with is her push to lower carbon prices and means to try to curb climate change. Now, she has lamented that fragmentation risks generating trade frictions and unpredictability for businesses that are seeking to decarbonize. Worse, it could weaken the effectiveness of global efforts to mitigate climate change. They're trying to push for a number of changes, but of course, one of the holdouts is going to be the one who's actually behind the scenes, the US, who is not going to bow to any regulations that it does not want to bow to. It's been reported that the multilateral cooperation has been the issue. It has contributed to stability and prosperity over the past several decades, yet it is under threat, not least from the architect of the system, the United States. Now, I want to emphasize multilateralism. Was it really multilateralism whenever it was a few Western countries controlling the policies being put forth? Of course not, but this is multilateralism as far as how they perceive it. Now, it's also said that since their inception, the international bodies have been dominated by the United States, which have been happy to apply its rules to others while exempting itself when it suits. The challenge that underlies its reluctance to realize its commitments to multilateralism is its unwillingness to allow other meaningful roles in setting multilateral rules. It is a challenge of reconciling national sovereignty with the imperative to operate globally on growing number of issues that transcend national boundaries. This has been a historical trend as far as how these international institutions are run. They're not run, again, for the benefit of everyone. They're benefiting a very small few. And of course, the United States must be emphasized. They're the ones putting up the money for these international institutions. So they look at this as an investment. Hey, I get to put this money forth, and I get to tell you what to do. Essentially, the same thing that you hear from some sports owners and everything. They think because they pay a certain person's salary that they have control over that person's body, their beliefs, their philosophies. And so it's a very slave master relationship that we get pulled into, which only furthers us, because again, we are once again at the bottom already. And so if these international institutions are beholden to the United States because the United States is putting forth the bill and they're going to allow them to get away with not following its own rules, well, that just puts us inside of a worse situation, because those rules are still being applied to us, the people who are the most disenfranchised, the people who are going the most hungry, the people who are the poorest. Those rules are still being applied to us, but not to the person, the institutions, the countries that are actually doing the worst to the planet. Now, there's a lot of lessons to be learned inside of this, I think, for many people. And I'll say there's a lot of lessons to be learned for us on a personal level. Us who think that we are going to go into the system, go into the White House, go into Congress, go into a corporate capitalism, go into these places, and we're going to change things. We're going to be revolutionaries from the inside. There's some questions that you should be asking yourself. One, if you were put in that position in the first place, or is there any possibility that you would be put inside of that position to derail the system? And the answer is probably no. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, since I can't derail the system and I can only be put in this position to further the system, is the system intrinsically good? Is the system good at the core? And if the system is not good at the core, then you should understand that you should get out of that system. Unfortunately, some of us have been fed this propaganda that it's just good to be there. It's good to be a black face inside of a white room. You've done your civic duty to your race just by being the only African inside of the conversation. You've done something that everyone will benefit from. This is a complete lie. And logically, it's a lie. Logically, it only shields white supremacy. Logically, it only hides the white supremacy. And we're going to hear from a second from Colin Powell about his admission that that's essentially what he was used for. So this is very important for us, particularly us who are minded to do something for our people, that we not fall for these false propagandas that, hey, you'll be the first CEO at this company and you'll be able to push for people under you and you'll be able to be a trailblazer. You'll be able to change things. Well, the problem is not necessarily going to be solved if your only contribution is being a blackface inside of a white supremacist system, is it? Wouldn't the problem be solved as far as addressing white supremacy head on? And you should understand this idea of, well, I'll do this now so that people can do this later. That's another lie. Or that I can do this later. That's another lie, because the system, have you done anything to weaken the system while you're in that position? If you have not, then you are not doing anything in the short term or the long term for your people. We have to get comfortable with this. We have to get comfortable with the complexities of our issues and understand that the surface level solutions are never going to affect complex issues. The closer and the quicker that we get comfortable with this, the quicker that we don't look for easy outs. That's what a lot of us are doing. We're going out easy because, hey, this is a good salary. Hey, this will, get me by. But we have to have higher convictions, specifically inside of certain, institutions. Okay, you have to work at the post office, all right. That's something that, let's talk about that. But in immediate, you who work at the WTO, you who work inside of the Department of Defense, you who work inside of these different places, let's actually have a real in-depth conversation about what your positions do directly to threaten the people. Let's have a direct conversation about that. And if we can't get to those real key institutions that are deliberately built to oppress us, if we can't have a real discussion on that, then you're going to be allowing for the continuance of oppression of your people. And that's something that we have to, again, become comfortable with. So what did Colin Powell say that, is going to help us who are trying to navigate this system?
I cannot see how anyone can tell me that the best way for one to advance is by being a hired killer. Even I don't see why we have ROTC on campus. We fought to put it off. You mean to tell me the only way we can advance is by being killers and killers of the enemies of American imperialism? Because who do we kill? We don't kill our enemies. Do we go to Tanzania, South Africa, and kill de Klerk? Do we kill the Ku Klux Klan? Do we kill racist policemen? No, we kill Arabs who ain't doing nothing against us. We don't even know them. They've never done anything against us. So it is clear here that Mr. Powell is a liar. Mr. Powell is a traitor to his people, and Mr. Powell is a traitor to humanity, and Mr. Powell accepts that position. That position was made again, and don't you ever forget it, because of Dr. Martin Luther King. If you love King, you can never love Powell.
Now, he admitted inside of his 1995 memoir, My American Journey, he said, my career should serve as a model to fellow Blacks in or out of the military in demonstrating the possibility of American life. Equally important, I hope then and now that my rise might cause prejudiced whites to question their prejudices and help purge the poison of racism from their systems, so that the next qualified African American who came along would not be judged by merit alone. This is the poison of capitalism. It has us saying some dumb stuff. So this idea that I was put into a position and I did a good job. Think about it. You person who is evil, you're intentionally going to go out and impress someone. I'm going to appeal to you and I'm going to do a good job so that I can break your stereotypes of my people. And therefore, you're going to allow more of my people to come in and, do what we do. Very sick mentality that we have been fed inside of this society. And it's everywhere, it's everywhere on the news. It's everywhere in social media, everywhere where you see a Black celebrity, you'll see people who parrot these same talking points. Now, he was a little more transparent, though. Later on, he says, I'm also aware that over the years, my career has given some bigots a safe black to hide behind. What? Me? Prejudice? I served with, over, or under Colin Powell. This is what they would do. This is what they always do. And this is what they'll do with you if you are inside of the position where you're actually going to do damage to the community because of the system you're in. Guess what? You're going to give license and leverage to people who don't have your community's best heart and in mind. They're going to be using you as their shield whenever scrutiny comes their way. This is the insidious nature of white supremacy, and I'm sure many of us are used to it by now. And this is the same things that we should be bringing to light inside of modern conversations about, hey, is this person being this institution good for us? Or are you being a shield for white supremacy? The most concerning thing about his admission, I think, is that the fact that he knows he was being a shield for bigots. What were those bigots doing? What positions of power did they occupy? What policies were they pushing for, Colin Powell? I mean, that's not a small thing to actually be willing to say. If you're saying that someone was a bigot that was able to hide behind you, well, was that the person that, decided the Iran-Contra scandal? Like, what was that bigot doing while you were being this exceptional Negro? That's the question that you should ask. While I'm being the best this, the best that, what are these bigots who are using me as a cover doing behind the scenes? And these are real questions that implicate all of us. We should understand. Now, going forth, it says, indeed, Powell's ride to the apex of American power has been cited by many politicians over the years as a sign of the nation's supposed colorblindness, as alleged proof that we have managed to leave racism behind. But Powell was acutely race conscious, aware that he was always being scrutinized and judged in ways that a white man would not have to endure, meaning even though he was the face for colorblindness, he knew that this was a lie, and yet he still complied and he still went with it because at this point, you're already so deep in. What do? You can't turn on, everything. Something he also said, had I been more militant, would I have been branded a troublemaker rather than a sorry, this word. Would I have been branded a troublemaker rather than a promotable black? A promotable black. Crazy. That's a good thing for some of us. That's an aspiration. I want to be a promotable black. Do you want to be a promotable black, or do you want to be a militant? That's the options that are out there on the table. Now, Powell's influence on U.S. national security and foreign policy became known as the Powell Doctrine in the early 1990s, which generally held that military action should be limited to when there was a clear objective and an exit strategy, when diplomatic options had been exhausted, and when there is extensive international support. Now, he had this policy in place with the Gulf War and also with the Gulf War, which was inside of Kuwait. Now, it should be emphasized that I think he basically felt like, okay, well, this is my advice, and they're taking my advice, so I must be the big guy now. I must be the real deal. They must respect me. They must respect my opinion. They must respect my thoughts. And this is the deception. Hey, they might go with you, make you feel like, oh, sure, we'll go your way once, we'll go your way twice. But does that mean that you are respected? Does that mean that you're on their level? Does that mean that they will actually listen to you whenever you're adamant about something? No, it doesn't. And it does say that the Powell Doctrine came into conflict with other members of George W. Bush's administration in the aftermath of the Iraq invasion. Now, his speech to the United Nations that year made the case for military action, but the speech contained faulty intelligence and factual errors. He told Barbara Walters that will always be a part of my record. It's painful. It's painful even now. I'm sure it's a lot more painful and devastating for the many people who were killed as a result of your actions. Now, this is the seriousness, though, that we should understand. He thought that he was in a big house. He thought that he was respected. He thought that he made it. He thought he was a promotable black. He thought all of these things, and yet he was still not respected. And, he tried to make up for it by becoming a Democrat, but we know Democrats are just Republicans with a different color, a different shape animal, different faces, different ways of talking about the politics instead of different politics. That's what Democrats are as opposed to Republicans. So that's not anything meaningful. He also voted for Obama. Obama was a black imperialist and probably more effective because of his blackness. Another casebook example of this. Learning from Colin Powell. for people who aspire to be the next Okonjo-Iweala, or for her herself, if by any chance you happen to come across this, we should be asking, who is hiding behind you because of your Africanness, because of your Blackness? Who's using you as their shield? What international institutions, what Fortune 500 companies, what multilateral corporations, what governments, what whoever is using you as their shield? Because this goes back to the impetus of this issue. I'm very sure that the Biden administration used her as an opportunity. Like it was said, they had to approve of her. She had to be put in a position by Biden and his people. They had to approve. If the United States didn't approve, she wouldn't be in a position. This was going to be their opportunity, just like Kamala Harris is going to be their opportunity, just like Obama was the previous opportunity, because he'll still use that. I used to work with Obama. This is going to be an opportunity to allow for the world to be distracted whenever you were even doing things worse than before or being complicit with the derailment of the international system for your own good, all because of China. And you have to, make China look like, they're not, they're not the powerhouse that they are. But this is the issue with our people whenever we're put inside of these positions. And so I hope that this point was emphasized. I hope that we understand it. And I hope that we start to be very careful about what allegiances we have. If you work in a system that's not harmful to the people. That's always, to me, I think, a good principle. Do you have to be inside of a certain position where you're going to actively hurt the people? Do you have to be a Black prosecutor? Why not be a Black public defender? Not saying that the public defender office is revolutionary, but it's not a Black prosecutor. Do something that doesn't require for you to betray your people. That is my emphasis, because these systems will lie to you and make you think that you will actually help, even whenever you're actively doing things to hurt your people. And I actually think that Okonjo-Iweala thought that she was going to do something good for Africans, and she's learning, I think, that was never the intention, that was never the idea. The idea was exactly what is happening, that unilateral actions by the United States would be shielded by an African woman, and colonialism, as it is manifested once again through a colonial institution of the World Trade Organization, it will once again go without scrutiny, because, hey, can't be colonialism if there's an African on the front cover. So that's what I have for this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and I love to see your comments. I will see you all in the next video.
Hey family, this is Tierney Cherie. I'm here to make an announcement that I'm very, very excited to make. I'm excited because I really think this is something that is important for our people. Otherwise, I would not have devoted so much time and energy towards it. So I finished my first book, and the book title is Fostering False Identity, the Child Welfare System's Design of Social Control of the Black Family. Now, why is this book something that I think will be very important for our community? Well, number one, it's dealing with the system of white supremacy, particularly the way that the system has targeted our children. If you don't know, our children are literally our future. Without our children, we have no future. And so understand that the system is very crafty when figuring out what to derail first. And to me, it's no mistake that the system particularly went after the Black family. If you look at what happened whenever we were enslaved by this system, and continues to go after the Black family, continues to go after Black children, continues to try to villainize African parents. So for that, I wanted to particularly talk about this subject. Now, the other thing that the book will deal with is our African identities. Why is it that our African identities are a threat to this system? Why is it that whenever we want to identify ourselves as being African, we get so much drawback inside of the Black community? I think a lot of us are not aware of the history of assimilationist thought inside of our community, this idea that we have to be close to white in order to be accepted. And so that's another subject that we delve into in this book. So I'm hoping that anyone who is, obviously, if you're a parent, a Black parent, and you really want to understand why it is that these systems are going after your children, I encourage you to read this book. I hope that it will arm you with a lot of knowledge and a lot of foresight, not just about how to protect your own children, but how to organize in your community, because that's really the purpose of the book, is to say that we have to organize among ourselves in order to protect ourselves from this white supremacist system. And then obviously, if you're an organizer in general, this is something that I think is important for you to read, because like I said, this is a subject in the Black community that we just don't discuss enough. Child welfare is not something that is going to get enough attention. People, obviously, will organize them around other causes, but this is one that is really important that I feel like we have to pay more attention to.